Hey everyone, and welcome back for another news roundup.
Yeah, lots to go over this week.
Definitely some pretty big stories developing internationally.
Yeah.
A landmark legal case we want to touch on, and even a little bit of tech drama that's spilling over to politics.
Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us.
Well, let's start with Syria because that whole situation's taken a pretty wild turn. Remember how we were talking about the Assad regime and how it seemed like it would just never end?
Yeah, it seemed unshakable with all that fierce loyalty from his supporters.
And then poof, gone. It all fell apart so quickly.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? About the whole nature of power, like
Hmm.
how much of that loyalty was genuine belief and how much was just because people were afraid.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Especially in a regime like that.
Right.
So now you've got Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, in control, and they've been labeled a terrorist organization by pretty much everyone. The UN, the US, the EU, and UK.
And their leader, Ahmed al-Shara, is trying to play this delicate game, trying to present a more moderate image. He gives these speeches saying they're not going to force religion on anyone.
Oh, right. And then there was that photo of him with a woman who then covered her hair.
Yeah, that caused a huge stir. Liberals were outraged and the hardliners felt betrayed. Talk about a no-win situation.
Seriously.
Yeah.
But then they go and implement the morality police and make hijab mandatory in schools. It's like their actions are speaking louder than their words.
Totally. And you can't forget about the impact all this instability is having on ISIS. It's basically giving them the perfect opportunity to stage a comeback.
The SDF who've been fighting ISIS, they're being attacked by Turkey now, so they've had to pull resources away from counterterrorism.
Yeah, their commander even warned about the risk of ISIS breaking out of those prisons that are holding like 10,000 militants.
We actually got a glimpse inside one of those prisons, El Sina, and spoke to an Australian ISIS detainee.
Oh, wow. What was that like?
He was very cagey about his past, which is
Yeah.
pretty unsettling.
I bet. And then there's the families of ISIS fighters in places like Raj Camp. They're practically buzzing with excitement about being freed.
Right. We spoke to the camp manager, and she said this kind of eerie calmness is actually a big red flag. It usually means the women are gearing up to escape and revive ISIS.
That's a terrifying thought for the Kurdish civilians like Juan, who are caught in the middle. They're fearing both ISIS and a Turkish invasion and feel abandoned by the international community.
It's a heartbreaking situation and a stark reminder of how fragile peace can be. All right, let's shift gears completely and talk about the Dominique Pellicot case in France.
Oh, yes. This is a landmark legal battle that's really shaken things up. Sparked a huge debate about how we view sexual violence.
So for those who haven't been following, Dominique Pellicot was convicted and sentenced to 20 years for drugging his wife Giselle and inviting dozens of men to rape her.
And what's truly remarkable is that Giselle decided to waive her anonymity. She's become a symbol of courage for so many.
Absolutely. But the case is far from over. There are serious questions about whether this was an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern of behavior.
Right. There's that assault case from 1999 involving a woman named Marion. DNA evidence links Pellicot to the scene, and they even found rope and ether in his car.
Ugh, that's chilling. And then there's his own daughter, Caroline, who believes he might be responsible for her mother's death, too.
Wow. The authorities are still looking into that one.
They are. What I find particularly disturbing is Pellicot's reaction when confronted with Marion's story. Apparently no change in expression, no remorse, just blank.
Like switching channels on a TV.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Deeply unsettling. Some experts have suggested he might have an antisocial personality disorder, which could explain his lack of empathy, but of course that's no excuse for his actions.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
This case has sparked protests, calls for legal reform, and a much-needed conversation about sexual violence, especially in the age of the internet.
It's forcing society to confront these issues head-on and hopefully lead to some real change. Okay, let's lighten the mood a little and talk about Elon Musk's little adventure in U.S. politics.
Oh, this should be good. So tell me, how does a tech billionaire end up influencing a government shutdown?
Well, it all started with that near bipartisan agreement to avoid a shutdown. Everyone thought it was a done deal, and then Musk throws a wrench in the works with a single post on his social media platform, X.
Wow, talk about wielding power. And of course, conservative lawmakers immediately jumped on board.
It's kind of scary how much influence he has just because he's got this massive platform and tons of money.
Right? He claims he's representing the voice of the people, but it makes you wonder who really holds the power in these situations.
It's definitely unsettling. And the fallout was immediate Republicans scrambling to appease both Musk and Trump Democrats joking about President Musk.
Right.
The whole thing felt like a reality show gone wrong.
With very real consequences. It really exposes the fragility of the Republican majority in Congress. They've been struggling with internal divisions for years, and this just adds another layer of chaos.
Yeah, governing effectively is going to be near impossible if they can't even agree on basic funding.
Hmm.
And then you've got Trump demanding a raise to the debt limit, which could lead to even more gridlock.
And poor Speaker Johnson's stuck in the middle trying to hold everything together.
His authority's already been weakened, and now he's being undermined by both Musk and Trump. It's a recipe for disaster.
Definitely something to keep an eye on in the coming weeks. This could get messy.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to a mystery that's been haunting us for years. The disappearance of Malaysia Airlines flight MH370.
Oh, wow. MH370. Any new developments there?
Well, after a decade of uncertainty, Malaysia has decided to relaunch the search. They're partnering with Ocean Infinity, a U.S. marine exploration company.
So they're giving it another shot. That's good to hear, I guess.
They're focusing on a 15,000 square kilometer area in the southern Indian Ocean. They've got some new data that they're calling credible.
It's a long shot, but even a glimmer of hope must be a relief for the families who've been waiting for answers for so long.
Absolutely. Speaking of hope, there's some good news coming out of Germany. Volkswagen has reached a deal with the IG Metall trade union, avoiding plant closures and layoffs for now.
That's a relief. I know they've been facing some tough economic challenges, especially with the declining demand in China.
Yeah, they're reducing production capacity and suspending wage increases.
Tough compromises, but at least they're trying to mitigate the impact and offer retraining and alternative employment opportunities.
Definitely a positive example of companies and unions working together to find solutions. Now, for a story that's sparking outrage and raising concerns about the Biden administration's immigration policies, deportations have hit record levels, surpassing even the Trump administration.
It's a complex issue. The administration's facing a surge in border crossings, but critics argue that these deportations are inhumane, separating families and sending people back to dangerous situations.
It's a real dilemma, trying to balance border security with human rights. Hopefully they can find a more compassionate and effective approach. Meanwhile, in Italy, Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini has been acquitted in that long-running case over his refusal to let a migrant rescue boat dock.
Oh, that was a controversial one. He argued he was protecting Italy's borders while others accused him of putting lives at risk.
Exactly. This acquittal has really exposed the deep divisions over immigration policy in Europe.
Finding a solution that addresses both security concerns and humanitarian needs is a tough challenge and one that's going to continue to be debated for a long time.
For sure. Now, for a story that might seem a little strange, 2 men have been arrested in Zambia for allegedly attempting to bewitch President Hakainde Hichilema.
Bewitching a president.
Yep. The police claimed they were hired by the brother of a prominent opposition MP and were found with all sorts of charms, including a live chameleon.
Wow. So witchcraft is taken seriously in Zambia.
It's deeply ingrained in the cultural beliefs of many parts of Africa. In France, the trial of those connected to the 2020 beheading of teacher Samuel Paty is underway.
This is a trial that goes beyond just those directly involved. It's examining the broader context of hate speech and misinformation that led to this tragedy.
Right. It all started with a lie. A schoolgirl claiming that Paty had shown obscene images of the Prophet Muhammad during a lesson on free speech.
And then her father launched an online campaign amplified by an activist with a radical following.
None of the defendants actually called for violence against Paty or knew the attacker. But the prosecution argues that their words created a climate of hate that ultimately led to his murder.
It's a chilling reminder of the power of words and the responsibility we all have to counter hate speech and misinformation, especially online.
Absolutely. Now, for a tragedy in Greece, a speedboat carrying migrants capsized during a chase with a Greek patrol vessel, resulting in at least 8 deaths.
It's a heartbreaking reminder of the desperate measures migrants take to reach Europe, risking their lives in overcrowded and often unsafe boats.
And it raises questions about border control tactics and whether pursuit operations could inadvertently contribute to such tragedies.
It's a complex issue, finding the balance between enforcing borders and protecting human life. Turning our attention to Russia, Vladimir Putin expressed regret for not invading Ukraine sooner during his end-of-year press conference.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty shocking admission.
It is. It suggests that his ambitions in Ukraine have been brewing for a long time, and he's willing to use military force to achieve them.
He also boasted about the progress of Russian forces, but reports on the ground tell a different story. Heavy casualties, logistical challenges. It's a carefully crafted narrative for his domestic audience.
Yeah, projecting strength and control. But the reality on the ground is much messier. Meanwhile, in the U.S., Starbucks baristas are making their voices heard. They've launched a 5-day strike demanding better pay staffing and working conditions.
It's the biggest action yet from Starbucks Workers United, and it signals a growing wave of worker activism across the country.
They're pointing to the huge gap between executive compensation and barista wages, highlighting the issue of income inequality.
And this strike comes at a time when Starbucks is already facing challenges, slowing sales backlash against price hikes. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
It's definitely a sign of the times workers are realizing their collective power and demanding better from their employers. Now, for a story that's a bit bizarre, drug gangs in Rio de Janeiro are incorporating religious elements into their operations.
Wait, what, religion and drug gangs?
Yeah, it's a strange mix. They're branding their drugs with religious symbols and seeing themselves as soldiers of crime carrying out a divine mission.
That's unsettling. It seems like a way to justify their actions and control their communities.
It's a complex phenomenon for sure, and it highlights the challenges of addressing violence and inequality in marginalized communities. Moving on to a story of nature's fury. Cyclone Cheeto has ripped through Mayotte, leaving a trail of destruction.
It's the strongest cyclone to hit the island in almost a century. Thousands are without shelter and basic necessities.
The French government's response has been criticized as slow and inadequate, which is fueling anger and frustration among the residents.
It's a reminder of the vulnerability of island communities to extreme weather events and the importance of effective disaster preparedness and response. Now for a story that's sending shockwaves through the scientific community. Chinese scientists have created the first genetically modified human babies.
Wow, this is huge. It raises all sorts of ethical questions about the future of human evolution.
They used CRISPR technology to edit the genes of twin girls, making them resistant to HIV. But the experiment has been met with condemnation, many arguing it was irresponsible and potentially dangerous.
It's like opening Pandora's box. Who will have access to this technology? What traits will be deemed desirable? And what are the long-term consequences?
It's a development that demands careful consideration and a strong ethical framework. All right, let's end on a lighter note. 2 men in Russia allegedly tried to steal a T-34 tank from a military museum.
You kidding, right?
Nope. Apparently fueled by nostalgia for the Soviet era, they were caught trying to tow the tank away on a trailer.
Wow, talk about a blast from the past. It seems those Cold War relics still hold a certain allure.
They do. Meanwhile, in the UK, a group of villagers came together to save their local pub from closure.
That's heartwarming. Love a good community effort.
They raised funds, organized events, even took turns working behind the bar.
And it worked.
It did. The pub is now thriving proof that even in tough times, people can come together and make a difference. Okay, now for a story that's got cybersecurity experts worried. A group of hackers has claimed responsibility for a massive data breach affecting millions of social media users.
Ugh, not another one. This highlights the constant threat we face from these sophisticated hackers who are always looking for ways to exploit vulnerabilities.
They're demanding a ransom in exchange for not releasing the stolen data, which includes personal information, passwords, financial details.
It's a reminder that we need to be vigilant about protecting our data both individually and as companies.
Absolutely. In the sports world, we've got a classic underdog story. An unexpected team has made a run to the championship game, inspiring fans with their grit and determination.
Love those stories. Proof that anything is possible with hard work and belief.
And in the entertainment world, a controversial film is sparking fierce debate. Critics are praising its artistic merit, while others condemn its graphic content.
Pushing boundaries, challenging viewers, sparking conversations. That's what art is all about.
It's a reminder that art is subjective and can evoke strong emotions, both positive and negative.
Definitely. And speaking of inspiring stories, a young girl who lost her legs in an accident has defied the odds and become a champion athlete.
It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of a positive attitude.
She's an inspiration to us all. Now, for a story that's a stark reminder of the environmental challenges we face, deforestation rates in the Amazon rainforest have reached alarming levels.
It's a wake-up call. We need to protect these vital ecosystems from the devastating impacts of human activity.
Absolutely. And in the world of finance, a major cryptocurrency exchange has collapsed, leaving investors scrambling.
It highlights the volatility of the crypto market and the need for caution and thorough research before investing.
It's a reminder that even seemingly established platforms can be vulnerable. And finally, a story that warms the heart. A group of volunteers is building homes for families who lost everything in a natural disaster.
It's a beautiful example of compassion in action, people coming together to help those in need.
It's a reminder that even small acts of kindness can have a huge impact.
Absolutely. Well, that's it for part one of our news roundup. Stick around for part two. We'll dive into even more stories from around the globe.
See you soon. And we're back with more news to unpack. This time we're heading over to North Korea, where things are getting pretty interesting.
Yeah, North Korean troops being sent to Ukraine to help Russia.
Hmm.
It's raising a lot of eyebrows and concerns.
Especially when you hear what North Korean defectors are saying about the conditions these soldiers are facing.
Apparently, they're mostly from this elite unit called the Storm Corps, known for their loyalty and fighting spirit, but also for being incredibly underfed.
It's a bit of a head-scratcher, sending malnourished soldiers into a brutal war. Like, are they really going to be effective?
Well, they've been trained for a very different kind of war. Mountainous terrain, not the flatlands and trenches of Ukraine.
So they're going in with a disadvantage. But on the other hand, these soldiers have been subjected to intense ideological indoctrination. They're basically taught to follow orders without question.
And for many of them, this is probably the first time they've ever left North Korea.
It's a chance to prove their loyalty, maybe even advance their careers. But it's also a huge risk. The casualty rates are reportedly pretty high.
And defection, while a possibility, is incredibly dangerous.
Ukraine and South Korea are trying to reach these soldiers through psychological operations, urging them to surrender.
But that's a tough sell when capture is seen as worse than death.
Exactly. And these soldiers are trained to save the last bullet for themselves rather than be taken prisoner.
It's a grim situation for sure. And their families back in North Korea, they're unlikely to protest. Their sons will be hailed as heroes, their deaths seen as a sacrifice for the regime.
It's really a tragic reminder of the human cost of war and how authoritarian regimes exploit their people.
Switching gears now, let's talk about that Starbucks strike in the U.S. Those baristas are making their voices heard loud and clear.
5 days off the job demanding better pay, staffing, and working conditions. This is a big deal.
It's the biggest action yet from Starbucks Workers United Union that's been gaining momentum across the country.
And it's not just about a few extra dollars an hour. This is about a growing sense of unfairness. The baristas are pointing to the astronomical compensation packages of executives like CEO Brian Niccol.
His potential earnings are in the millions, while baristas are struggling to make ends meet.
It's a stark illustration of income inequality, and it's resonating with workers across industries.
What's interesting is that this strike is happening when Starbucks is already facing challenges. Slowing sales backlash against price hikes. Now they've got this very public display of worker discontent.
It's a risky move for the baristas, especially during the holiday season, but they're hoping to capitalize on the company's vulnerability and force them to negotiate.
This whole situation really highlights the changing dynamics of labor relations in the 21st century.
Right. The power of social media, the ability to organize across geographic boundaries, and the growing awareness of corporate profits versus worker wages.
Workers are becoming more empowered and willing to challenge the status quo.
And it's not just Starbucks. We're seeing similar actions at Amazon with delivery drivers walking off the job.
It's a trend that's likely to continue as workers realize their collective power.
It's a reminder that the fight for fair wages and decent working conditions is far from over.
Speaking of fights, Cyclone Cheeto has devastated the French territory of Mayotte in the Indian Ocean, and people are furious with the French government's response.
This cyclone, the strongest to hit Mayotte in almost a century, really exposed the vulnerability of these island communities to extreme weather.
And it laid bare the deep inequalities that exist between Mayotte, one of the poorest departments in France, and the mainland.
Many residents are living in informal settlements lacking basic infrastructure. When the cyclone hit, they were left with nothing.
Homes destroyed, families displaced, a desperate need for aid. And the response from the French government has been slow and inadequate.
People are accusing them of neglecting Mayotte, of prioritizing other concerns over the well-being of these citizens.
We spoke to Zinedine, a young man who's trying to rebuild his family's home with whatever scraps he can find. He doesn't believe any help is coming.
And we heard from Yasmin, a mother of 3 who had to take her children to a makeshift shelter at a local school because her home was destroyed.
They're angry, frustrated, feeling completely abandoned by their own government.
And this whole situation is feeding into a larger debate in France about immigration and how resources are allocated to overseas territories.
There's a fear, particularly among those on the right, that providing too much aid to Mayotte will attract more undocumented migrants.
It's a callous argument that ignores the suffering of those who already call Mayotte home.
This cyclone has exposed not just the physical vulnerability of the island, but also the social and political fault lines that run through French society.
It's a stark reminder that even in a wealthy nation, inequality and neglect can have devastating consequences.
Now let's turn our attention to a worrying development in Syria, the resurgence of ISIS.
It's a nightmare scenario fueled by the ongoing chaos and the weakening grip of the Kurdish-led SDF.
The fall of the Assad regime, while welcomed by many, has created a power vacuum that's allowed extremist groups like ISIS to regroup.
And the SDF, who've been fighting ISIS for years, are now under attack from Turkey and forced to divert resources.
It's a dangerous situation, with the very real possibility of ISIS breaking out of prisons, holding thousands of their fighters and supporters.
General Muslim Abdi, the commander of the SDF, is deeply concerned. He warned that ISIS is more capable and has more opportunities than ever before.
They've been acquiring weapons, recruiting new fighters, and exploited the distraction of other conflicts to rebuild their networks.
And then there are the camps like Raj Camp, where families of ISIS fighters are being held. There's a growing sense of anticipation among them, a belief that they'll be freed soon.
We spoke to the camp manager, and she described this eerie calmness. It's a sign that the women are organizing, packing their bags, preparing to revive ISIS.
It's a chilling thought. And then you have the Kurdish civilians caught in the middle. People like Jawan, who we met in Al-Asaka. He's packing his bags, fearing both ISIS and a Turkish invasion.
He's seen the brutality of both groups and doesn't believe the international community will step in to protect them.
It's a desperate situation, a reminder that the fight against terrorism is far from over.
Okay, let's move on to something a little more positive. Volkswagen has unveiled a new electric car that's set to challenge Tesla's dominance.
The ID.7. It's got an impressive range, advanced features, and a competitive price point.
Volkswagen is serious about catching up to Tesla in the EV race. They've invested heavily in their electric vehicle program, and their goal is to become the world's largest EV manufacturer by 2028.
It's an ambitious goal, but they seem to have the resources and technology to pull it off.
And this competition is good news for consumers. It's driving innovation, lowering prices, and giving buyers more choices.
As more companies invest in electric vehicles, it's accelerating the transition away from fossil fuels.
Speaking of sustainability, there's a new trend emerging in the fashion industry: recycled clothing made from plastic bottles.
It's a creative solution to the problem of plastic waste and a way to make fashion more eco-friendly.
These recycled clothes are stylish, durable, and they raise awareness about reducing plastic waste.
It's a step in the right direction. Hopefully more companies will embrace these circular economy principles.
Now let's talk about a new social media platform that's making waves: Mindspace. It's designed to prioritize privacy and user control over data.
It's a direct challenge to those data-hungry giants like Facebook and Google.
Mindspace is offering users a way to connect and share information without feeling like they're being constantly tracked and monetized.
It's a response to those growing concerns about data privacy, misinformation, and the influence of algorithms.
It will be interesting to see if they can gain traction, but it definitely speaks to a growing desire for alternatives for online spaces that respect our privacy.
Definitely. Now, for a story that's capturing imaginations, a private company is planning a mission to Mars with the goal of establishing the first human colony.
It's a bold ambition and a testament to the growing role of private companies in space exploration.
They're still in the early stages, but they've already attracted significant investment and assembled a team of top experts.
It's a long shot, but the potential rewards are huge.
This mission could pave the way for future human settlements on Mars, opening up a new chapter in human history.
It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest leaps forward come from those who dare to dream big.
Absolutely. Well, that wraps up part 2 of our global news roundup. We've covered a lot of ground, from the hopeful to the heartbreaking.
But don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with part 3, where we'll explore even more stories from around the world.
We're back for our final round of news, and this one hits close to home for the holidays.
Yeah, a terrible incident in Germany. A car plowed into a Christmas market in Magdeburg, injuring dozens of people.
Awful. Just awful. The footage is just heartbreaking. Emergency vehicles everywhere, injured people lying on the ground. It's a reminder that even during times of celebration, tragedy can strike.
It brings back memories of that Berlin Christmas market attack a few years ago. It leaves you feeling so vulnerable.
The authorities are still investigating the motive in Magdeburg, but early indications suggest it might not be terrorism.
Let's hope not. In other news, Hungary has granted asylum to a former Polish official facing corruption charges.
Yeah, the former Deputy Justice Minister Marcin Romanowski, Poland, is not happy about it.
They see it as a provocation from Hungary and a violation of EU principles.
Romanowski claims he's a victim of political persecution, while Poland insists he's just trying to escape justice.
It's definitely adding fuel to the fire between Hungary and Poland. Those two countries have been butting heads for a while now.
It's a reminder that even within the EU, there are deep divisions and historical tensions that can easily resurface.
Speaking of tensions, let's go back to Rio for a minute. We were talking about those drug gangs earlier and their embrace of Pentecostal Christianity.
Right. It's a fascinating and unsettling phenomenon.
Apparently, they're branding their drugs with religious symbols and seeing themselves as soldiers of crime carrying out a divine mission.
It's creating some real problems within the favelas. They're being accused of suppressing other religions, particularly Afro-Brazilian faiths.
We spoke to Pastor Diego Nascimento, who used to be a gang member himself, but found redemption through religion.
What did he have to say about all this?
He sees this blending of faith and crime as a perversion. He says true believers can't engage in such activities.
But for the gangs, it seems to be a way to justify their violence and control their communities.
It's a complex and disturbing situation.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds us that religion can be used for both good and evil.
And that addressing crime and violence requires more than just law enforcement. We need to tackle those underlying social and economic inequalities.
Well, folks, that about wraps it up for this week's News Roundup. We've covered a lot of ground from the hopeful to the heartbreaking.
It's been quite a journey, and it shows just how interconnected our world really is. What happens in one corner of the globe can have ripple effects everywhere.
Absolutely. So as always, we encourage you to stay informed, engage in thoughtful discussions, and hold those in power accountable.
Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep working towards a better world.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.